The morning sunlight had barely spilled across Manhattan's skyline when Letitia James stepped out of her government-issued sedan, heels striking the pavement with the kind of purpose that turned heads, even on Wall Street. She wasn't there for ceremony, and she certainly wasn't there for coffee. "This is a courtesy, Anita. One single courtesy," she said, adjusting the sharp collar of her navy coat as her assistant struggled to keep up. "When these bankers slam the door on working people, I don't send an intern, I deliver the message myself." Anita Reyes didn't argue. She had seen that look before, focused, cool, surgically calm, the kind that usually preceded subpoenas or national headlines. Inside East Bridge Capital's towering lobby, the usual choreography of privilege was in motion. Junior analysts speed-walking with tablets, over-caffeinated assistants whispering code words into Bluetooths, and the artfully bored security guards giving passive nods to anyone in heels or cufflinks. But the room shifted when Letitia entered. Not because she was loud, she wasn't, but because she looked like someone who didn't care who in the building thought they were in charge. 42nd floor, she told the elevator operator, who blinked twice before pressing the button. Not every day did the Attorney General of New York visit your bank, and certainly not with that expression. "James Caldwell knows we're coming?" Letitia asked without turning her head. "Confirmed. He's expecting a discussion about a partnership opportunity," Anita said dryly, already anticipating what was to come. "Let's see how much partnership he wants when he sees the numbers." As the elevator rose, Letitia glanced at her reflection in the polished steel. She didn't preen. She calibrated, the set of her jaw, the tight line of her lips. She wasn't just here to present a plan. She was here to see what kind of man said no to it. When the doors slid open, the executive floor greeted them with what could only be described as inherited power. The dark wood walls were older than most of the staff, the air scented with money and memory. Behind a green marble desk, a receptionist with perfectly set pearls and a nameplate reading Clara Winslow offered a practiced smile. "Good morning, Ms. James. Mr. Caldwell will see you shortly. Would you or your associate care for anything while you wait?" "No, thank you. Just let him know we're here." The tone was cordial, but not soft. Letitia never softened. Moments later, Martin Caldwell emerged from his glass-walled sanctum with the look of a man who still believed in boardroom hierarchy and Brooks Brothers as moral compass. Silver hair, perfectly symmetrical tie, a handshake engineered by generations of prep school ego. "Madam Attorney General," he said, extending his hand with the confidence of someone who believed protocol could disarm scrutiny. "Welcome to Eastbridge. Ms. Reyes, nice to meet you." Letitia took the hand briefly. "Mr. Caldwell," she said flatly, moving past him before he could finish his choreographed greeting. His office was, predictably, the kind of excess that justified bailouts and bonus hearings, panoramic views of Manhattan, vintage maps of colonial trade routes, ironic given the current conversation, and a desk large enough to accommodate both ambition and avoidance. Letitia sat without being asked. "We're here to discuss the Public Access Capital Fund, state-backed, zero-interest loans for minority-owned small businesses. We sent over the proposal 2 weeks ago." Anita slid the folder onto the desk. "You'll find revised fiscal projections and updated risk profiles inside. Fully collateralized, liquidity ready, reviewed by 3 independent firms." Caldwell didn't open the folder. He gave the kind of smile that usually came before a condescending chuckle. "I did review your submission," he began, leaning back. "Ambitious, I'll give you that. But the underwriting model..." Well, our board felt it wasn't quite in line with our, how should I say this, fiduciary thresholds. Letitia cocked her head slightly. You're rejecting it. Not rejecting, he said, palms up in theatrical diplomacy. Reassessing. It's a complex market, and we have shareholders to consider. Perhaps if the state was willing to adjust the terms, or if the guarantee structure— Mr. Caldwell, Letitia interrupted, her voice like glass-cutting velvet. What exactly do you think is risky about investing in communities that keep your ATM network profitable? Caldwell's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. I think we all want what's best for New York, but good intentions don't balance ledgers. No, Letitia said, rising smoothly from her chair. But arrogance has a price, and you're about to learn what it costs. Anita stood, already gathering the materials. Caldwell, still seated, raised an eyebrow. Surely there's no need for dramatics. This is just a business decision. Letitia looked down at him, eyes sharp as subpoenas. So was this visit. And with that, she turned and walked out, leaving behind the smell of cologne, leather, and the faintest trace of fear. Caldwell adjusted his cufflinks, smug in his dismissal. But he had no idea what kind of war had just begun. Martin Caldwell didn't decline the proposal so much as he performed a rejection, like a man used to dismissing lives with a pen and a sip of espresso. He took off his glasses with the solemnity of someone about to announce a verdict, and leaned back with the kind of smug ease usually reserved for trust fund lectures at Yale. Ms. James, he began, your vision is certainly ambitious, and of course, your public record speaks for itself. Letitia didn't blink. She simply folded her hands, precisely, deliberately, as if preparing to dissect whatever sanctimonious fluff was about to follow. However, Caldwell continued, his tone slipping into the rehearsed cadence of a banker dodging accountability, I have some concerns. The structure here, it's, how do I say this, complex. The revenue projections, while impressive, might be a touch too optimistic for our current risk appetite. Letitia let him talk, like watching a magician pull coins from a child's ear. Entertaining until you remember the kid's still hungry. The numbers are solid, Anita interjected, but her voice was cut short by Caldwell's raised hand, the universal signal for, I'm about to say something patronizing. With respect, he said, I've been in banking for 23 years. I've seen every kind of political passion project walk through those doors. He smiled like a man who'd never had his car searched. And while your enthusiasm is commendable, Eastbridge has standards. Our shareholders expect us to demonstrate prudent judgment. The temperature dropped several degrees, not in the room, but in Letitia's posture. The Attorney General didn't flinch, didn't even frown. She simply tilted her head slightly, as if trying to hear him over the static of his own arrogance. Prudent judgment? She repeated, the words crisp and slow like a lawyer reading your name into the record. Mr. Caldwell, what exactly do you find imprudent? Funneling capital into neighborhoods your firm redlined for 3 decades. Caldwell pressed on, oblivious to the way his next words would age like unrefrigerated mayonnaise. Your portfolio is interconnected, hard to pin down, makes it difficult to assess true value, and frankly— He paused, smiling just wide enough to signal that this, right here, was the moment he felt most powerful. Some of the numbers don't quite add up. Letitia stood, not suddenly, not theatrically. She rose the way a closing argument rises, with finality and purpose. Numbers don't add up, she echoed, her voice stripped of warmth. That's funny, because I thought you were in the business of calculating risk, not perpetuating it. Caldwell gave a chuckle that only men who've never been audited can summon. Well, he offered, maybe you'd have better luck with a more aggressive lender, or perhaps restructure your deal with some additional equity. We do appreciate you considering Eastbridge, of course. Strictly business. Everything is business, Mr. Caldwell, Letitia replied, especially the consequences. The elevator ride down was silent, save for the soft hum of betrayal being filed away in real time. Anita didn't speak. She didn't need to. She knew that expression on Letitia's face. It was the one reserved for prosecutors who falsified evidence or landlords who thought lead paint was a feature, not a violation. As they exited the building, Anita finally dared to ask, "You want me to pull the proposal from Treasury?" Letitia didn't look up. I want everything on this building. Ownership structure, lease schedules, maintenance contracts, the works. Anita raised a brow. You're going after the bank's headquarters? Letitia's gaze locked on the Eastbridge facade, her voice like a blade sheathed in calm. Every structure has a price. Every institution has a weak point. Mr. Caldwell just showed me both. That night, while Caldwell poured himself a celebratory bourbon and regaled his wife with tales of dispatching yet another idealistic government fantasy, 3 research teams were already triangulating shell companies, offshore trusts, and real estate holdings tied to the very ground beneath his hand-rubbed mahogany desk. Meanwhile, in Letitia's office, the lights stayed on long past midnight. "Ma'am," Anita said, slipping a report into her desk. "There's something interesting in the title history." Letitia looked up, a slow, deliberate smile spreading across her face. Not the smile of a politician pleased with applause, but the quiet satisfaction of a woman watching an empire tilt, one column at a time. And the beauty of it? Caldwell still thought the meeting had gone his way. Anita Reyes didn't bother knocking. She stepped into Letitia James's office like someone holding the match before the fuse. "It's not just interesting," she said, dropping a folder on the desk. "It's surgical." Letitia raised an eyebrow, her expression as still as the scales of justice on her seal. "The building," Anita continued, "Eastbridge's headquarters. The holding company on paper is called Clearwater Properties, but dig 2 layers down and you'll find a Luxembourg-based consortium, highly leveraged, mostly offshore and spooked by any ripple in the U.S. market. They're shopping the property, quietly, as in, if you so much as sneeze too loud, they'll pull the plug." Letitia didn't laugh, but the corners of her mouth twitched the way they do when she smells opportunity wrapped in hypocrisy. "They're scared?" she asked, casually flipping open the file. "Good, that makes 2 of us," she added dryly. "Only difference is, I'm not the one hiding behind shell companies." Outside, Manhattan buzzed with its usual delusions of permanence. Inside, Letitia leaned back and studied the skyline like a surgeon considering where to make the first incision. "Cancel everything tomorrow," she said without looking up. "Calls first, then paper." Anita didn't need clarification. She'd seen this before. The late-night lights, the chessboard taped to the glass wall, the way Letitia's espresso intake doubled without anyone daring to comment. And across town, Martin Caldwell was doing the exact opposite of what self-preservation required. He was bragging to board members about how he put the AG back in her lane, bragging to his wife about how some people mistake public office for leverage, and yes, bragging to a Bloomberg reporter off the record about how Eastbridge doesn't do community theater. Meanwhile, in Letitia's office, the theater was being built, one brick at a time, with case law, asset registers, and zoning maps instead of curtains and footlights. The desk was covered in sticky notes and post-its marked with cryptic acronyms: HLLC-3, RIVH-7, SCP Group. One marked simply Trigger. "Ma'am," Anita said, "you'll want to see this part. Premier Bank's lease. 8 months left. They've started early negotiations, probably trying to lock in a discount before the Eurozone investors get cold feet." Letitia didn't respond right away. She was busy circling something on the title history, an obscure rider clause buried in a 1993 amendment about tenant relocation liability. He thought rejecting that fund proposal would win him favor with his board. Now we own the floor they're standing on. Figuratively, for now. The smile that followed wasn't warm. It was strategic. "We'll make our offer through 6 shells," she said. "Nothing ties back to this office. Not yet." "Want me to call legal?" Anita asked. "No," Letitia said. "Call Marcus in Albany. I need the purchase language clean, invisible, and written like it came from a Canadian pension fund trying to save face after a bad quarter." The rest of the night moved at the pace of war. Not gunfire, but signatures, transfers, emails that disappear before they leave metadata. By 3 a.m., the strategy wasn't just formed, it was moving. Quiet offers, timed inquiries, whispered valuations from firms with reputations so discreet they didn't even advertise. Letitia's eyes burned with fatigue, but sharpened with every hour. She stared out the window again, where the lights of Eastbridge Capital glowed obliviously. "People like Caldwell mistake architecture for authority," she said, barely audible. "But buildings are just leverage, and I've been moving leverage my whole career." "Should I draft the shell structure plan now?" Anita asked, blinking away exhaustion. "Now," Letitia replied. "By the time Caldwell finishes his croissant, I want 3 entities on the line with their offer letters pre-cleared." The next morning, as Caldwell strutted into his office whistling a Sinatra tune, 3 voicemails were already waiting. Swiss Capital Partners, Northern Vista Holdings, and a charming little firm called Harbor and Bright with a Cayman footprint and $1 billion in liquidity, all asking politely about the building. "Probably nothing," he told his secretary. "Market games, happens every cycle." But as lunchtime approached and the inquiries piled up, even Caldwell's hair gel couldn't hold the denial together. "I don't understand," he muttered to himself. "Why now? Why this building?" And somewhere across the city, Letitia James was already 2 steps ahead, sipping her coffee and reviewing the next document, one labeled Phase 2. Because the thing about silent takeovers is this: the moment your opponent notices, it's already done. From the outside, Eastbridge Capital still looked like a fortress, glass, steel, and smugness polished to a high gloss. But inside, Martin Caldwell was sweating through his collar, trying to contain a boardroom of jittery billionaires with nothing but half-smiles and platitudes pulled from the 2008 bailout playbook. "It's routine," he repeated, like a toddler explaining away a shattered vase. "It's probably just noise, market chatter, some hedge funds fishing for leverage." The problem? Hedge funds don't call at 7 a.m. asking about zoning permits, and Swiss Capital Partners wasn't a name on anyone's radar until yesterday, when it mysteriously appeared in 3 different leaseholder inquiries. Back in Letitia James's office, no one was fishing. They were dragging, with precision, with hooks, with bait custom-made to trigger exactly the kind of panic Caldwell was now trying to disguise as interest from the market. Anita was already fielding responses from the European consortium. "They're ready," she told Letitia, eyes still glued to her screen. "And they're nervous, which means they're pliable. They want a clean exit, no noise, especially with all the anti-EU tax exposure talk in Parliament." Letitia nodded slowly. "Good. Offer through Delaware Holdings at 92% of market value. No contingencies, all cash, and make sure it expires at midnight. I want them thinking about us while they dream of bank runs." Across the city, Caldwell was indeed having his version of a nightmare. His secretary had just handed him a note, his third of the morning, this one from an obscure group called Horizon Equity Partners. "James, it's Richard again," came the growl over the intercom. "Boardroom, 10 minutes. Caldwell didn't argue, not because he had answers, but because he didn't have the time to fake them anymore. Meanwhile, Letitia was finishing her espresso in a locked, windowless dining room at the Four Seasons, where the only things on the table were NDAs and non-traceable email addresses. "Ms. James," her lead attorney began, "we've structured the purchase through 7 separate entities, multiple jurisdictions. If Eastbridge starts looking, all they'll find is fog, and by the time they finish tracing, we'll already have the deed." Letitia didn't smile. She didn't need to. This wasn't a win, it was a correction. "Just make sure the LLCs are bulletproof. I don't want Caldwell lawyering his way out of this with a cocktail napkin clause." Outside, the sun glinted off Manhattan's towers like teeth in a fake smile. Across town, Caldwell sat stiffly at the head of the conference table, trying to calm board members who looked more like a Senate panel mid-hearing than a fiduciary team. "You knew about this?" Richard barked. "Chatter about a building sale? You said it was nothing." "We don't even know who's buying," Caldwell protested. "It's speculation. Shadow firms. I mean, who purchases a $300 million asset through shell companies?" "Someone who doesn't want you to know they've already won," Eleanor Whitman replied coldly. Her pearl necklace didn't move, but her words cut through the air like litigation on speed dial. Caldwell's mind flashed back to the meeting with Letitia James. The folder, the rejection, the way she said, "Everything is business." He had written it off as theater, a political stunt. What he hadn't realized was that while he was denying her proposal with manicured disdain, she was already studying the ground beneath his feet. Back at the Four Seasons, Sarah entered with the update. "The Europeans are ready to meet. They've cleared Le Bernardin for noon." Letitia glanced at her attorney. "That's too public. Move it to the back room at Osteria Stella. No windows, no reservation history, and definitely no Bloomberg reporters sipping Negronis." Her attorney nodded. "They'll want proof of funds." Letitia slid a flash drive across the table. "They'll get it, but only in that room, and only after we verify their authority to sign." She stood slowly, checked her watch. Caldwell still thinks he's being hunted. He doesn't realize he's already in the bag. Across Manhattan, Caldwell stared at the floor while Richard shouted about shareholder liability and reputational risk. He was trying to remember when exactly the air got this thin, when the walls started to tilt, when the top of the tower stopped feeling like power and started feeling like exposure. And above it all, Letitia James was quietly pulling every string. Tomorrow she wouldn't need to speak. The building would speak for her. And Caldwell, well, he'd be lucky if he still had an office to sit in when the lights came on. Mama Lucia's in Brooklyn wasn't known for international finance deals, unless you counted the owner's tax arrangements. But on this particular afternoon, it hosted the most consequential backroom negotiation Wall Street would never read about. Letitia James had sent her envoy, not because she couldn't close the deal herself, but because real power doesn't need to show up in heels to move mountains. The European gentlemen arrived precisely on time, tailored to within an inch of their generational guilt. They had names like Heinrich, accents like privilege and panic in their eyes. "We were told your client can move quickly," one of them asked cautiously, as if hoping for a miracle dressed in paperwork. 48 hours, came the reply, flat as granite. All cash, no press, no paper trail, and no second chances. The offer dies at midnight. Meanwhile, back at Eastbridge, Martin Caldwell was trying to convince a room full of panicked executives that maybe losing your headquarters overnight wasn't a death sentence. "It's complicated," he offered, which is banker code for "I have no idea what I'm doing, but please don't ask follow-up questions." The building has always had a layered ownership structure. Shells, offshore trusts, legacy deed transfers. "James," Eleanor Whitman snapped, "you're describing a Ponzi scheme, not a property." The boardroom descended into chaos. Caldwell dabbed his forehead with a linen handkerchief, which, ironically, absorbed stress far better than his explanations ever did. As he tried to string together a coherent sentence, his phone buzzed. It was his secretary. "Urgent." "Sir, you've got a call from someone at Delaware Corp Holdings. They say it's about the building." He took the call like a man headed to the gallows. "This is Caldwell." "Good evening, Mr. Caldwell. I'm calling to inform you that as of 9 a.m. tomorrow, the property at 515 Lexington Avenue will officially transfer to new ownership. We will be conducting a full structural assessment. All tenants must prepare for possible relocation within 30 days. Caldwell blinked, as if the words hadn't been spoken in English. 30 days? This is a banking institution. We don't just move down the block with a U-Haul. "We understand your concerns," the voice replied, calm as death. "But the decision is final." Click. Silence. Caldwell's hands were shaking as he dialed the board chairman. "Charles, we have a problem, a very big problem." But it was already too late. Somewhere across town, Letitia was raising a glass of Barolo with her team, not in triumph, but in deliberate restraint. "To timing," she said, "and to those who confuse square footage with permanence." Her eyes didn't leave the screen showing the latest feed from Lexington Avenue. Workers were already on site, hoisting down Eastbridge's signage, one gleaming letter at a time. "When do we let him know it's us?" Anita asked. Letitia cut into her steak, slow and surgical. "Oh, he'll know, right around the time he looks up and sees my name where his used to be." And the next morning, Martin Caldwell did just that. In the middle of his 7 a.m. emergency meeting, flanked by legal counsel, PR Flax, and a compliance officer who looked like she'd rather be hit by a bus than explain this to regulators, Caldwell was interrupted. "Mr. Caldwell," his assistant burst in, pale as printer paper, "you need to see this, now." The executive team rushed to the windows, and there it was. Not a rumor, not a headline, but a reality, descending from the skyline like divine retribution. A new sign, being affixed to their headquarters by crane. Bold, inevitable, and absolutely unmistakable. James. Caldwell stumbled back into his chair. No, it can't be. But it was. As if on cue, his phone buzzed again. A message. No name, just one sentence. Short, surgical, final. Some of the numbers do add up after all. James Caldwell stood motionless, the text glowing on his phone like the final nail in a gold-plated coffin. Sometimes the numbers do add up. LJ. Around him, the executive floor of Eastbridge Capital had transformed into a corporate emergency room, phones ringing like cardiac alarms, interns scattering like startled pigeons, and senior staff whispering disaster scenarios into Bluetooth headsets that now felt less innovative and more futile. From his office high above Manhattan, Letitia James didn't need to scream. She had already spoken, in code, in contracts, and in capital. "Ma'am," Anita said, entering with a fresh stack of reports. "The structural team is ready to begin." Letitia didn't even glance up from her tablet. "Be thorough," she said. "Very thorough. We wouldn't want to overlook potential liabilities." And with that, an army of orange-vested inspectors descended on Eastbridge like a constitutional virus in a body riddled with deregulation. On the 42nd floor, chaos had turned into carnage. Charles, the board chairman, slammed his palm on the table. "You rejected her loan application? The Attorney General's?" "I followed protocol," Caldwell stammered. "There were issues with the numbers." "The numbers?" Eleanor Whitman scoffed, her pearls nearly rattling with rage. "She just bought the damn building without blinking. Maybe it's your math that needs a reassessment." Reporters were already circling like vultures with press credentials. CNBC called it the boldest quiet coup in financial history. Real estate brokers were offering condolences that sounded more like eulogies. The head of compliance had locked herself in a supply closet with 2 Xanax and a shredded draft of last quarter's investor letter. Meanwhile, Letitia's inspection team was doing exactly what it had been trained to do: find everything. Cracks in the foundation, irregular airflow reports, outdated asbestos compliance certifications, questionable elevator calibrations, every item documented, cataloged, and delivered with surgical indifference. "Sorry," one said, not sounding remotely sorry, "but this floor may require a temporary evacuation. Safety protocol." By midday, Eastbridge employees were packing up like tenants fleeing a rent spike. Security guards watched in disbelief as corridors once reserved for whispered M&A deals now echoed with the sound of collapsing certainty. Caldwell, tie limp and spirit flatter than his post-IPO forecast, slumped in his office chair watching his kingdom shrink with every clipboard. That's when she sent Anita. "Mr. Caldwell?" she asked sweetly, stepping into the wreckage. "Ms. James would like a word with you. She's waiting downstairs." "When?" he muttered, already dreading the answer. "Now." The elevator ride was slower than usual, either by design or by existential gravity. When the doors opened, Letitia James stood waiting, arms crossed, flanked by her team of legal architects and building engineers. The lobby fell silent. Even the security camera blinked, as if reluctant to record what came next. "James," she said evenly, "I hope you don't mind the familiarity. After all, I am your landlord now." Caldwell tried to fake composure, but his voice cracked like a faulty floorboard. "Surely we can discuss this. Reasonably." "Reasonably?" Letitia's tone dropped an octave. "Like when you rejected a fully backed economic justice fund because it didn't meet your risk tolerance." "Tell me, James, how's your tolerance holding up now?" Her voice sliced through the lobby like litigation through a loophole. "The structural team has flagged several concerns. It could take months to resolve. And as your landlord, I have to prioritize safety over sentiment." "Months?" Caldwell croaked. "We have vaults, server rooms, clients." "Business is business," she interrupted, tossing his own words back at him like a subpoena. "Just a decision. Nothing personal. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and your lease renewal? We'll be renegotiating. The terms will reflect current market realities, and moral ones. The rest of the day was a montage of disaster. Press leaks, stock plunges, and one VP reportedly seen updating his resume in the stairwell. By sundown, Caldwell's once pristine office looked like the set of a failed Broadway production. Documents everywhere, lights flickering, hope misplaced. Upstairs, Anita handed Letitia the latest reports. The stock's down 8%. Executive resignations are starting. Morrison's assistant was crying in the bathroom. Letitia didn't celebrate. She simply looked out the window at the city's skyline. Brilliant, brutal, blind to arrogance. Let them sweat through the night, she said quietly. Tomorrow we'll show them what power looks like when it wears heels and carries case law. And as Manhattan slipped into darkness, 2 people lay in bed, one counting the seconds until unemployment, the other counting the hours until Phase 2. The message was clear, literal, and 42 stories high. You don't underestimate a woman who knows how the numbers really add up. By the time the sun scraped the skyline with that judgmental Manhattan glare, Premier Bank had become less a financial institution and more a cautionary tale dressed in Armani. Elevators that once carried senior executives now carried taped-up notices. Mandatory structural inspection. Compliance required. Every floor, every office, every ounce of false security. Letitia James wasn't sending a message, she was etching it into the foundation. In her office, Anita was already flipping through the morning's chaos report like it was Sunday brunch gossip. 3 more execs updated their LinkedIn profiles. One tagged it open to work. Morrison called an emergency meeting for 8 a.m. and... She smiled, pausing like a showrunner before a season finale twist. Our team is ready to leak the first findings to the Wall Street Journal. Letitia didn't blink. She just said, make sure they lead with asbestos. No one argues with asbestos. Meanwhile, at Premier's executive floor, James Caldwell was sweating through his pinstripes like a man discovering fire for the first time. Inside his own building. Structural concerns. Richard snapped. This place passed inspection last year. Caldwell loosened his collar, which at this point was the only thing in the room still holding anything together. They're claiming it's the support columns, he muttered. 6 floors, including the trading floor. The trading floor? Eleanor exploded. James, we're a financial institution, not a pop-up tent in a state fair. What do you want us to do? Hang a sign that says, back after structural collapse. But before Caldwell could piece together a rebuttal longer than 3 syllables, his secretary stormed in with a tablet. Sir, the report just leaked. It's on the Wall Street Journal front page. Caldwell's face drained like a faucet left open overnight. He grabbed the tablet and scrolled, jaw tensing with every word. Concerns about foundational stability, potential asbestos presence, obsolete wiring on vault levels, load-bearing inconsistencies in high-value areas. This is a setup, he mumbled. This is a chess game, Charles cut in. And while you were busy playing Monopoly, Letitia James just took your queen, your board, and probably your damn chair. Across town, Letitia was watching the press coverage from her desk. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her face remained neutral, the kind of expression worn by people who've already read the final chapter and are just watching others catch up. Ma'am, Anita said, glancing up from her screen. Morrison wants a meeting. Urgently. Make him wait, Letitia replied, sipping her coffee. Let him think about how much his calendar used to cost per hour. At precisely 12:30, James Caldwell stepped into Trump Tower's marble lobby, which now felt more like a public shaming chamber with chandeliers. His tie was crooked. His cufflinks didn't match. His posture was somewhere between alpha and about to ask for a severance package. Sarah met him with all the warmth of a polite cease and desist letter. Mr. Caldwell, she'll see you now. The elevator ride to the top was silent, but the silence was the loud kind. The kind that says you are not here to negotiate. You are here to learn. When the doors opened, Letitia James stood at the window of her penthouse office, the city sprawling beneath her like a financial battlefield. She didn't turn. Not right away. She let the moment settle. Let the weight of elevation press against ego. James, she said finally, still looking out the window, how's your morning going? Do have a seat. He sat nervously, hands clasped tight. Ms. James, about the structural assessments, troubling, aren't they? She said, spinning around slowly and taking her place behind a desk that could double as a witness stand. As your landlord, I have a responsibility. Safety first. You understand? The building passed inspection last year, he insisted, though even he sounded unconvinced. Yes, by your inspectors. I brought my own. We have different standards, much more thorough, and, admittedly, slower. That last word landed like a loaded freight train. Caldwell's face twitched. What do you want? He asked. Letitia leaned back, hands folded. Want? James, I'm shocked. You think this is about wanting? I'm just a responsible property owner doing her due diligence. She let the pause hang, then added, although I did come across a rather sloppy loan rejection recently. Shame how that turned out. Caldwell flinched. If this is about the fund... Everything is about something, James, she interrupted, calm and clear. You taught me that, remember? The numbers don't quite add up, I believe you said. At that moment, Anita walked in with a thick stack of files. Ms. James, the follow-up assessments are ready. Shall I release them to the media? Letitia turned to Caldwell, studying him. What do you think, James? Should we share them? The vault wiring alone is deeply concerning. Your clients would love to hear about that. Caldwell said nothing, just stared, defeated. The room went still, like the final seconds before a gavel drop, and just as the silence threatened to suffocate him, Letitia smiled, politely, surgically. We're not done, but I'll give you time to update your numbers, and maybe your philosophy. Then she stood. Meeting's over. Across the street, reporters were already assembling. They didn't know yet what was coming, but they would. Because the next move wasn't a threat, it was a demonstration. And Letitia James wasn't just rewriting the rules, she was reminding the city who wrote the original ones in the first place. They moved to First National, the junior trader replied, voice taut with dread. They're offering immediate transfers and full deposit insurance, no questions asked. Morrison's mouth moved, but no sound came out. He didn't need to speak. His face already told the story of a man realizing he'd just been outplayed in 3 dimensions he didn't know existed. Across Manhattan, Letitia James sat in her sun-drenched office sipping a modest green tea like the picture of civic restraint, even as Premier Bank hemorrhaged credibility faster than its servers could issue denial emails. Anita entered with the day's latest stats. 12% drop in their stock price. Risk management team gone. 5 more clients pulled over $500 million in deposits before noon. "It is," she paused. "We're getting calls from legacy institutions asking if your team is available for consultations." Letitia chuckled, just once. "Tell them I'm fully booked until the collapse." Back at Eastbridge, the air had thickened into a toxic soup of desperation, ego, and unpaid loyalty. In the boardroom, Charles looked ready to throw a chair. "James, our vault is under inspection. Our vault. Do you know what that says to clients? That their life savings are currently being examined by a man with a clipboard and steel-toed boots." Morrison tried to rally some form of composure, though his tie now hung like a white flag from his neck. "The vault inspection is a bluff. She's playing games. If we just ride it out—" "Ride it out?" Eleanor snapped. "James, this isn't a storm. It's a seismic event. The vault is the psychological heart of any bank. You lose that, you lose everything. People don't entrust generational wealth to a building wrapped in scaffolding." Meanwhile, beneath them, the structural team Letitia had deployed moved with theatrical precision. Flashing lights, hazard tape, blueprints splayed like crime scene photos. Engineers murmured in acronyms and slow headshakes. "Definitely going to need floor-by-floor imaging," one said, loud enough for traders nearby to hear. "Electrical inconsistencies. Vault pressure readings are unusual." Morrison's phone buzzed again. Another resignation. This one from the head of institutional lending. Attached was a short note. "Don't take it personally." "But I've got kids." Letitia, reviewing the live updates on her tablet, didn't so much as blink. "Begin phase 3, she said. "Let's move to the public narrative. Clients don't leave because of numbers. They leave because of the story those numbers tell." And what a story it was. By 3 p.m., Bloomberg was running a breaking banner. Vault compromised? Premier bank struggles under structural uncertainty. CNBC had a panel of suit-clad analysts debating unprecedented landlord-hostile takeovers. Fox Business, not to be outdone, simply called it the bank that said no and paid for it. Inside Premier's executive war room, Susan Chen threw her hands up. "You want to talk perception, James? I've had 7 clients ask if the vault is even accessible right now. Do you know what happens when people believe their money is physically unreachable? They run. They don't walk. They run." Richard leaned forward, eyes bloodshot. "You were the one who wanted to prove a point, to shut the door on her loan just to flex. And now she owns the building, the headlines, and half our board's liver enzymes. The joke's over. And guess what? We're the punchline." As Morrison staggered through the now war-zone-like trading floor, he caught sight of a maintenance crew rolling in industrial dehumidifiers. "Precautionary," they said with a wink. At least 5 traders were openly discussing job offers from Morgan Stanley. 2 more were comparing U-Haul quotes. In her office, Letitia finally leaned back and exhaled. "It's happening," Anita said. "We're watching a controlled demolition, with press passes." Letitia nodded. "Tomorrow, I want the financial press to run one headline and one headline only. Confidence evaporates as Premier implodes from within." "But what if Morrison tries to fight back?" Anita asked. Letitia smirked. "He's already lost. He just hasn't accepted the paperwork yet." And just like that, the story marched forward, dragging Caldwell with it. His name, his reputation, and whatever sliver of control he still imagined he had. Because in the game of capital and consequences, it turns out the only thing more expensive than arrogance is underestimating someone with both a title deed and a memory. By the time James Caldwell's resignation letter hit the lacquered surface of the boardroom table, the last illusion of control shattered like a glass of Chateau Margaux dropped in a boiler room. 23 years of polished suits, market forecasts, and smug risk memos, all distilled into 2 cardboard boxes and a line item in the morning's press. Outside, the Premier Bank logo had already been scraped off the facade like plaque from the teeth of capitalism, replaced by gleaming chrome letters that spelled out exactly who had the last word. James. Letitia. James. It wasn't just the fall that stung. It was how cleanly it happened. Letitia hadn't screamed. She hadn't threatened. She hadn't even raised her voice. She simply applied pressure with the precision of a civil servant turned surgical tactician, and Premier Bank collapsed under the weight of its own hubris. While the board scrambled to plug leaks in client confidence, operational flow, and basic hallway morale, she had been orchestrating a real estate symphony from a corner office that didn't need a logo to intimidate. "Wrap the inspections," she said that morning, barely looking up from her desk as Anita delivered the update. "Premier's board is shopping for a new CEO. Morrison's name is already being scrubbed from the internal directories." "Shall we keep the audit pressure up another week?" Anita asked. "Let it bleed a little longer?" But Letitia shook her head with that rare brand of confidence that comes not from revenge, but from mastery. "The message is already on the walls, and the lease at Premier, the atmosphere was thick with resignation, both literal and emotional. The head of compliance was now managing his own severance paperwork. Traders who once treated Caldwell like a demigod now scrolled job boards between trades. The espresso machine in the executive lounge, once the site of minor empires built over foam art, had gone mysteriously silent. The janitor had stopped wiping the brass. Even the building's air felt different, like the ghosts of arrogance past were being evicted one passive-aggressive clipboard at a time. Caldwell's walk through the trading floor was less a farewell and more a ghost tour. No eye contact, no whispered thanks, just the sound of keyboards, muted curses, and the wheeled insult of his boxes being rolled to the lobby. There, beneath the new signage gleaming like poetic justice, he paused. "Where to?" the cabbie asked. Caldwell didn't answer immediately. He looked back once, just once, at the building he had ruled, misjudged, and finally lost. "Just drive," he said. Back at Trump Tower, now metaphorically painted in burgundy and bronze, the numbers looked better than expected. Stock had stabilized. Premier's board was already in exploratory talks with Letitia's leasing team. "Very reasonable terms," Anita reported, still unable to mask her grin. "You'd think we hadn't just gutted their C-suite." "That's because we didn't gut them," Letitia said, standing at the window. "We just reminded them what happens when you mistake institutional polish for real power." "What now?" Anita asked. Letitia didn't turn. "Now we make money. Now we take the boardroom they defended with arrogance and rent it back to them at 3 times the rate." The game hadn't ended with a grand finale. There were no champagne corks or headlines that screamed, "Justice served." No, this was the quiet, devastating efficiency of a woman who knew that the best revenge wasn't a roar. It was a whisper delivered through a contract, a press leak, and a flawlessly timed inspection order. And as Premier's new interim CEO fumbled through his first crisis management call, somewhere across the skyline, Letitia James opened a fresh file, a new opportunity already lighting up her desk. Morrison was out. The lesson had been taught, and New York, as always, kept dancing. None the wiser, but permanently altered, because in the city that never sleeps, the one thing more terrifying than a market correction is a woman with receipts and a deed in her hand. Phase 2 was complete, and in the silence that followed, the only thing louder than Caldwell's downfall was the sound of every other banker on Wall Street double-checking the terms of their leases. James Caldwell, once the smug high priest of Premier's ivory tower, had now become little more than a Bloomberg trivia question and a LinkedIn profile nobody dared endorse. His signature, once capable of moving 9 figures before lunch, now sealed the sale of his Hamptons estate at a loss so humiliating it could have qualified as charitable giving. And yet, as Manhattan's skyline twinkled with the indifference of capitalism, somewhere in its quiet crevices, a man was left staring at Zillow listings he used to scoff at. Meanwhile, in the steel and glass sanctum of Trump Tower, Letitia James reviewed the morning briefing like a war general studying surrender terms. Premier's board is holding another emergency session today, Anita reported, placing the latest file on her desk. They're openly discussing merger options. First National's offering to absorb operations, preserve some brand elements, but only if they get 60% of client accounts by quarter's end. Letitia didn't blink. What about Morrison? Anita hesitated, then shrugged. Still off the grid. His wife just sold the apartment on Park. Word is, they're moving somewhere. Quieter. Letitia offered a faint smile. Good. Quiet is where consequences echo loudest. Over at Premier, the term corporate continuity had devolved into a game of musical chairs, except the music had stopped weeks ago, and everyone was fighting over who got to hold the fire extinguisher. Susan Chen reported 6 more resignations over breakfast, one of them being the head of international trading, an executive so loyal she once refused Goldman's overtures during bonus week. Now she was gone, along with 2 decades of institutional memory and every proprietary spreadsheet she'd built. Where are they going? Charles asked, voice hollow. Goldman, Morgan, even Chase took one. They're circling us like sharks at a summer regatta. The boardroom was more triage unit than strategy hub now, with Charles nursing what looked suspiciously like an ulcer, and Eleanor Whitman channeling the ghost of Cassandra. We've become radioactive, she snapped. Do you think any serious institutional client wants to deal with a bank whose vault inspections were live-streamed to CNBC? Our stock stabilized, Charles offered weakly. For now, Eleanor shot back, until the next leak, or the next resignation, or the next New York Magazine cover story about how the bank that got trumped lost control of its own narrative. At Mar-a-Lago, Letitia James sat at a private table surrounded by donors, power brokers, and one very amused hedge fund founder who offered a toast. To the woman who didn't just crush Premier, but made every boardroom in New York install reinforced humility. Letitia, ever the composed tactician, raised her glass without bravado. I didn't crush them. They collapsed the moment they thought their suits made them bulletproof. Back in Manhattan, Premier's board was reaching the final stages of grief, somewhere between bargaining and institutional self-loathing. We need to finalize merger talks, Eleanor said flatly. First, National wants a decision within 10 days. Richard added, and if we don't move fast, they'll just poach what's left of our portfolio and leave the rest to rot. Charles looked down at the list of executives who'd left in the past month. It read like the program at a funeral, every name a eulogy. And yet, amid all this, no one dared say Morrison's name aloud anymore. Not out of respect, but out of superstition. To mention him now was to conjure the ghost of strategic arrogance, to summon the very blueprint for how not to manage a crisis born from ego. The man who once dismissed a loan pitch with a smug smirk had, in the end, triggered a sequence of events so severe it now served as case study material at NYU Business School, when spite becomes a line item. As the sun set over the East River and Manhattan exhaled the day's last breath of ambition, Letitia stood at her window, the city sprawled beneath her like a chessboard mid-match. "And Morrison?" she asked without looking up. Anita replied without hesitation. "Gone. Replaced. Forgotten." Letitia nodded. "Then we're finished here. Send the leasing proposal to Premier's new board. Tell them the terms are fair. They'll know what that means." And with that, the final chapter in Premier Bank's cautionary tale was written, not in red ink or earnings reports, but in memory. The memory of a refusal, the memory of a smirk, the memory of a woman with a deed and a strategy who proved once again that in high finance, vengeance isn't just a dish best served cold. It's served with interest. By the time the merger was finalized and the last embossed Premier Bank stationery was tossed in a recycling bin, Wall Street had learned what it rarely does: humility. Not through regulation, not through protest, but through one woman with a deed, a grudge, and a genius for psychological warfare. Letitia James didn't just take a bank, she took the entire notion of invincibility and dropped it from the 42nd floor. And as First National quietly unveiled their new branding across what was once Premier's marble sanctum, her point landed harder than any press conference could have. At the top of Trump Tower, Letitia sipped her coffee in silence, watching the rebranded signage being hoisted into place with the slow, theatrical precision of a final curtain call. "Triple rent," Anita confirmed, not even trying to hide her grin. And their board didn't negotiate. They just asked when they could sign. Meanwhile, in Phoenix, James Morrison stared at a screen too small, in a room too quiet, logging into a bank too irrelevant to ever make the news. Remote work, they'd called it. Reassignment, he'd told himself. But everyone knew what it really was. Exile with Wi-Fi. He'd gone from being the gatekeeper of billion-dollar deals to nervously triple-checking PDFs before hitting submit. When his wife brought him coffee, he flinched, thinking it might be another email. It wasn't. It was just a silence he couldn't escape. He looked up. "They're calling it the most expensive no in banking history," he muttered. "One polite rejection. And now my name's a case study in 6 MBA programs." Back in Manhattan, the real estate press ran glowing retrospectives. How Letitia James orchestrated the quietest takeover in banking history. Financial podcasts whispered in awe. The bank that forgot to check its lease. Twitter had a field day with memes of Morrison's face photoshopped onto a Monopoly board, captioned, "Do not pass go. Do not collect bonus." Eleanor Whitman was spotted having lunch with First National's new CEO, explaining to a reporter that the Premier culture had simply outlived its utility. Susan Chen updated her LinkedIn profile with a new job title, Transition Lead. Everyone had moved on. Everyone but James. Letitia, of course, never mentioned him again. That wasn't her style. The flowers she sent when his Hamptons house sold. Pure strategy. The card that said, "Sometimes the numbers do add up," was less insult and more prophecy. And the final message, sent just hours after the merger was sealed, "The loan would have been cheaper," wasn't even taunting anymore. It was, frankly, a mercy. a reminder that there had been an easier way. He just couldn't see it through the fog of his own importance. And what now for the woman who took down an institution with a closing document and a smile? She returned to her next project, her next meeting, her next opponent. Letitia James didn't need applause. She didn't need headlines. Her victories didn't echo. They whispered, quiet, precise, irreversible. And while the financial world churned on, pretending premiere had never happened, the executives who stayed up at night reading quarterly losses now remembered to read their leases too. As for Morrison, the desert had softened him. In Phoenix, no one recognized his name, and for that he was almost grateful. Until one afternoon, scrolling through financial headlines he could no longer ignore, he saw a new acquisition. A smaller regional firm, swallowed up in silence. No lawsuits, no leaks, just gone. Same structure, same tactic, same pattern. And at the bottom of the article, in small print, was the new building owner, Liberty Asset Group, a shell company tied to none other than Letitia James. Morrison closed the article and leaned back in his chair. "She's doing it again," he whispered. His wife looked up from across the room. "Doing what?" He shook his head slowly. "Teaching another man the price of forgetting who holds the deed." Back in New York, Anita entered Letitia's office with the next set of files. The Liberty deal closed this morning. Smooth as silk, Letitia didn't look up. And the former CEO just announced his retirement to focus on family. Letitia smiled faintly, her pen already gliding across the next page. Then we're on schedule. Because in her game, it was never just about the building. It was about the lesson. And the real lesson? Sometimes the most powerful statement isn't a press release. It's the silence after the deal is done. In the end, it wasn't a hostile takeover. It was a financial morality play, staged in marble and steel, starring one man's ego and another woman's silence. Letitia James didn't raise her voice. She raised property value. And Morrison? He finally learned that in Manhattan, the math always remembers.